This is an abandoned prison in New Orleans.
From prisons where inmates have been known to eat each other, to facilities so strict and ruthless inmates seek the death penalty to avoid living inside their walls, these are the top 10 terrifying prisons you should never enter or else. Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York has been operating since 1826. The prison is well known, not just for how long it's been around, but for the notorious inmates who've been housed there in the past, names like Al Capone and Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. The facility sits on the banks of the Hudson River, and it makes for a pretty foreboding view. Another one of the darker things about Sing Sing is its history with capital punishment. The prison was home to an electric chair which was used until 1965. Over the years, a number of executions took place here, which definitely contributes to some of the legends that haunt the grounds. And just like with most American prisons, it has a violent reputation. With thousands of inmates over the years, conditions have been harsh. There's gang activity, fights, all the stuff you can look forward to if you happen to land yourself there. San Quentin State Prison in California is now called San Quentin Rehabilitation Center. It's a name most people have heard of. It was established in 1852, making it the oldest prison in the state, and it has quite the rep. San Quentin is especially notorious for its death row, which houses some of the most dangerous criminals in the United States. The prison has executed over 700 inmates, and 737 are currently sitting on death row. So the place has come up in discussions about capital punishment in America. Capital punishment is controversial, especially in the state of California though. The last inmate to die of lethal injection in California was in 2006 at San Quentin. The atmosphere at this prison is tense. It's housed some of the state's most hardened criminals, and inmates live under constant surveillance. This includes regular searches and strict routines, but even still, there's this ever-present threat of violence. Reports of inmate-on-inmate violence are common, and many staff members fear for their own safety as well. Aside from death row, San Quentin is known for some pretty infamous riots and escape attempts too, like the riot in 1971 that led to the deaths of several inmates and staff. Carandiru Penitentiary in Sao Paulo, Brazil was infamously one of the most violent prisons in the country. It opened in 1956, initially designed to hold around 3,000 inmates, but at one point it housed over 8,000. That's some severe overcrowding. There was a lack of sanitation, food shortages, and violence was all over the place. The prison was basically a powder keg waiting for a spark. And one of the most shocking events in Carandiru's history was the 1992 massacre. It began when a riot broke out in the prison and military police stormed the facility. In the aftermath, 111 inmates had been killed by police in what many considered an execution rather than a riot control operation. This crackdown brought international attention to the appalling conditions inside the prison, and after years of chaos and violence, Carandiru was officially closed in 2002. In fact, it wasn't just closed down, it was fully demolished, with only one block left intact to be used as a museum. La Santé prison in Paris has earned a reputation as one of the most notorious prisons in Europe. It opened in 1867 and has housed a number of high-profile inmates, including political prisoners and infamous criminals. La Santé has been known for overcrowding, especially in the 20th century. Many inmates report living in cramped cells, sometimes sharing space meant for one person with multiple others. The facilities are old and in many cases deteriorating, sanitation issues are common, and the prison has faced criticism for inadequate medical care and mental health support for the inmates. This has made La Santé a breeding ground for violence. Over the years, nearly 40 inmates have taken their lives here. And a little piece of history for you, but the second last public execution in France took place outside this prison in 1939. A lot of inmates have attempted escaping from here, and a good number of these escape attempts have ended violently. In 1971, inmates Roger Bontemps and Claude Buffet took hostages during their escape, hostages that they ended up killing. The two inmates died by guillotine for their crimes. ADX Florence in Colorado is often referred to as the Florence Supermax, or the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The facility was designed to lock in some of the most dangerous criminals in the country. It opened in 1995 after 2 inmates housed in the United States Penitentiary Marion took the lives of 2 prison guards, and this happened just 3 hours apart. The guards' deaths were blamed on the poor prison design, and it was decided that a new facility had to be built for the most dangerous and uncontrollable inmates. ADX Florence is a high security prison that houses inmates who pose extreme security risks and are deemed to have absolutely no concern for human life. The prison is known for its strict control and isolation methods. Inmates spend most of their time in their cells, which are essentially small concrete boxes with only a slit for a window. This is meant to prevent the inmates from knowing their exact location within the facility, which of course helps prevent any escape attempts and minimizes the interactions inmates have with each other. Anytime the inmates are out of their cells, it's usually reserved for exercise, but even that is done in isolated cages. Guards are heavily armed and every move is monitored by cameras. Any sign of defiance can lead to severe punishment.
Coming in at number 10 is Salt Pit, Afghanistan. Salt Pit is a secret CIA-run prison in Afghanistan. It is one of the several prisons that were set up by the CIA after the September attack in New York and was intended to hold people suspected of having links with radical criminals. The torment of prisoners happened every day in Salt Pit, and prisoners were often subjected to inhumane punishments and conditions, including mock executions. Its cells are small and without windows or toilets, and due to this, the prisoners have to relieve themselves in a bucket. Inmates are also stripped naked and made to sleep on cold concrete floors. CIA operatives always kept loud music playing as a form of psychological torture. Now, Dr. Garrett Bahir, who was held at the prison for 6 months, revealed that the CIA interrogators tied him to a chair and sat on his stomach. Another Gul Raham, who later died in custody and remains the only verified death at the prison, experienced more violent punishment. He was stripped naked, his hands chained over his head while he was repeatedly beaten and drenched with buckets of water. Gul died of hypothermia on the morning of November 20th, 2002, and the CIA did not return his body to his family or inform them of his. Now, beginning in April 2021 until the final withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan, large sections of the Salt Pit were demolished by the departing personnel before the Taliban gained control of the site. Number 9. Camp 7, Guantanamo Bay. Camp 7 was built in a hidden location away from the main prison. Camp 7 was so carefully hidden that no one knew of its existence for 2 years after it opened in 2006. Now, Camp 7 was home to 15 prisoners the CIA considered high-value detainees. One was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was seen as the mastermind of the September attack. The CIA has been accused of mistreating the prisoners, and when its existence was revealed, journalists were not allowed to visit. The Red Cross was allowed in on the condition that it never publicly speak about what it saw. One of its inmates, Razmi bin al-Shia, complained that his cell always vibrated and made some strange noises. Now, the US military denied all accusations of psychological torture and claimed he was just hearing things, but in 2014 the Pentagon confessed that he was hearing real noises, but said it was the result of the prison falling apart. Number 8. The Resort, North Korea. Inmates at the resort aren't radical criminals, but blacklisted relatives and officials of the North Korean oligarchy. It's located just 30 miles away from the Chinese border, and the resort is believed to hold up around 1,000 people. It has so many inmates because prisoners will often move in with their families. Now, while heavily guarded, it does not look like a prison, but more like a small town. Prisoners do not try to escape since the living conditions aren't bad. They don't perform any hard labor or endure any additional punishment and get free cooked meals every day. Kim Sung-ae is one of the people suspected of being held at the resort. She used to be the second wife of the late president Kim Il-sung. Another suspected prisoner is the aunt of the current president Kim Jong-un. She's the wife of Jang Song-taek, who was taken to the resort after her husband was executed in December 2013. But for North Korea, these conditions seem a little too good to me. Number 7. Cat's Eye, Thailand. Cat's Eye was a secret CIA prison in Thailand, and it could still be active today since no one knows its precise location. Everyone agrees that it is in Thailand, and even though the CIA and Thai government deny its existence. Cat's Eye was exposed in a 2014 US Senate report in which its location was listed as country redacted. Now, the prison was hurriedly set up in 2002 to hold Abdul Zuba, who was suspected to be one of bin Laden's henchmen. Abdul was picked up in Pakistan in March 2002, and the CIA was confused on where to keep him. They wanted a place far away from US jurisdiction and the Red Cross, so they built Cat's Eye. For several months, he was the only inmate held there, and he lived inside a box that was no bigger than a coffin and was continuously waterboarded until he fainted. The CIA used him to test out several of their enhanced interrogation techniques. Cat's Eye's second prisoner was Abd al-Rahim al-Narshi, who arrived there in November 2002. Both prisoners were frequently slapped, stripped, deprived of sleep. Cat's Eye was reportedly shut down in December 2002 after the CIA moved the inmates to another black site in Poland, but who knows if they're secretly still active today. Number 6. Tamara Interrogation Center, Morocco. The Tamara Interrogation Center was a secret prison jointly operated by the CIA and the Moroccan government. The facility originally opened as a CIA-run secret interrogation center following the September 11th attacks. However, the CIA soon turned it into a prison, but was more interested in detaining political prisoners. Zakaria Momi, a French-Moroccan citizen who was held there for 4 days for political reasons, said his Moroccan interrogators told him he slaughterhouse and that he would leave in pieces. Another, Usama Buttar, who fought with the Bosnia-based Islamist Matilla group in the 1990s and in 2003, said the Moroccans told him that they were torturing him because the Americans told them to. Now, a report by the US Senate revealed that the CIA knew Morocco was torturing prisoners at the facility. The CIA complained to the Moroccan intelligence agency, but the complaint only destroyed the relationship between the CIA and the Moroccan government. The CIA also planned on abandoning the Terama site for another prison, but later changed its mind. Now, on the other hand, Morocco denies all accusations of torture, but I think they're both guilty.
And we're starting off the list with Salisbury Prison in North Carolina. Salisbury Prison was a Confederate prison camp that began operation in 1861. First, the conditions in the prison weren't so bad. I mean, it was still a prison camp, so not an ideal place to spend your time, but not a complete nightmare either. There were roughly 120 Union soldiers housed there. They were fed decently and were given shelter, but that 120 inmates quickly grew to about 10,000 after only a few years. It comes as no surprise that the conditions at the camp severely dipped in quality. There was severe overcrowding. Many of them didn't have proper beds to sleep in. There wasn't enough food to feed everyone. Sanitation was bad. And this all led to the spread of disease and starvation. There was a high percentage of death amongst the prisoners. At number 9, we have Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City, Missouri. This prison operated between 1836 and 2004, and for a long time it was the oldest operating prison west of the Mississippi River. Because of some of the gruesome stuff that went on here, this prison garnered quite the reputation of becoming known as the bloodiest 47 acres in America. The building still stands today, and it's said to be haunted by the former inmates who lost their lives within its walls. In the early days of the prison, neglect and mistreatment by guards was commonplace. Inmates were whipped, sometimes for no reason at all, as well as enduring far harsher forms of torture. A number of executions took place within the prison, and violent riots resulted in the loss of life on more than one occasion. One of the most infamous prisoners at Missouri State Pen was James Earl Ray, who managed to escape from the prison by hiding in a box used to ship bread. And just a year after making his escape, he would shoot down Martin Luther King. Next on the list is the Wyoming Territorial Prison. Beginning operation in 1873, this prison started off hot with a horrible fire within that very same year. Great start. Within only a few years, the prison became overcrowded. This meant poor conditions for the inmates and an increase in violence. Things leveled out, though, by the 1880s. Conditions were still harsh. However, the prisoners had to remain silent at all times. They were referred to simply as their designated number, and endured harsh physical and psychological punishment for breaking the rules. The most famous prisoner here was Butch Cassidy, the notorious train and bank robber and leader of the gang known as the Wild Bunch in the Old West. Today, there are a number of ghosts said to haunt the building, which now stands as a historical site, including that of a former cigar maker named Julius Greenwald. Greenwald had landed himself in prison after shooting his wife, having discovered her working in a brothel. But he was in the brothel, so he wasn't going there to see his wife. A little hypocritical, if I might say. Greenwald died while serving time at the prison, and his spirit is said to still be trapped within the building. Some visitors claim to smell a faint aroma of cigars wafting through the empty halls. Number 7, Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia. Established in 1829, it was one of the first penitentiaries in the United States, designed to implement the revolutionary Pennsylvania system. This system focused on solitary confinement and reformation through reflection and labor, but the conditions within the penitentiary were far from ideal. Inmates were subjected to prolonged isolation, confined to small cells with minimal human interaction, and this lack of social contact often led to severe psychological and emotional deterioration among the prisoners. The penitentiary's architecture, designed by John Haviland, featured a hub and spoke layout where cell blocks radiated from a central surveillance hub. This made monitoring inmates easier, but also resulted in harsh living conditions. Over time, the poor conditions and the negative effects of solitary confinement on mental health became more evident, and isolation and lack of proper medical care contributed to a decline in the inmates' well-being. Despite efforts to improve conditions, the penitentiary struggled to address the physical and mental toll on its prisoners, and it closed its doors in 1971. At number 6, we have the Maxwell Street Police Station. This Chicago police station was built in 1888 in response to the increase in violence and crime in the neighborhood, but over time the police force became just as brutal as the criminals they were supposed to be protecting the neighborhood against, and stories started coming out about the horrors that inmates housed in the cells at the station would endure. Inmates endured grueling torture at the amusement of the officers, and the station soon gained a pretty bad reputation, receiving some very unsettling nicknames like the Old Red Fortress, Bloody Maxwell, and the wickedest police station in the world, just to name a few. Number 5, Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York. The first prison on the list that's actually still in operation. The land for the prison was purchased in 1825 in Mount Pleasant on the banks of the Hudson River. 100 inmates were transferred from Auburn Prison to this piece of land where they would begin construction on their new home. It was constructed from marble from a nearby quarry, and the prison operated using the Auburn system, meaning prisoners were forced to remain silent at all times and worked through the day performing intense physical labor. If rules were broken, harsh physical punishment would be inflicted on the inmates. And Sing Sing prison became famous for its death row, housing the infamous death house where between 1891 and 1963, 614 executions took place with the electric chair. Things are definitely a lot better for the prison nowadays though. Still a prison, so I wouldn't want to go, but at least they're allowed to talk now. Next up on the list is San Quentin State Prison. Beginning operation in 1854, this was and still is one of the most dangerous prisons in the United States. It houses the only death row in the state of California. Executions used to be carried out through the gas chamber, but are now done through lethal injection. During its early years, San Quentin housed prisoners in deplorable conditions. With overcrowding and unsanitary facilities, the prison garnered a reputation for brutality, with reports of mistreatment, inmate violence, and harsh discipline. And the place has held some of the most notorious inmates in American history, like Charles Manson, and riots and violent incidents have erupted over the course of its operation. In at number 3, we have the West Virginia Penitentiary in Moundsville, West Virginia. With such a long and dark history, this place is known as one of the most haunted former prisons in the United States. Opening its doors in 1876, the prison operated for over a century before closing in 1995. Throughout its many years of operation, the penitentiary saw countless violent incidents, including riots and deadly clashes amongst inmates. The conditions were poor, often cramped and unsanitary, and the prison's most infamous feature was its use of the electric chair for executions, given the nickname Old Sparky, as well as hangings in its earlier days, which were often made public. With all the violence and death that took place within this ominous Gothic-style building during its operation, there are a number of reports of paranormal activity that have emerged over the years. The building still stands today and now has ghost tours with visitors and investigators reporting unsettling experiences during their visits. In at second place, we have Alcatraz. I'd put it at number 1, but this is a pretty heavily discussed haunted location, so I just thought that would be too obvious. I'm very cool because I'm a contrarian. Alcatraz, a rocky island located in San Francisco Bay, was first used for military purposes in the 1850s, housing soldiers and acting as a defensive stronghold. In 1934, it transitioned into a high-security prison, housing notorious criminals like Al Capone and George Machine Gun Kelly. Inmates here endured solitary confinement, demanding labor, and harsh punishment. Alcatraz gained a reputation for being an inescapable prison because of its isolated location and the frigid waters that surrounded it. Despite that though, there are several famous escape attempts from this prison, more so than most prisons to be honest, so I think they're kind of overcompensating with that. Over the years, a total of 14 escape attempts were made, with the 1962 attempt by Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers being probably the most famous. The escapees disappeared and were never found, and some say they actually may have made it to shore and were able to start a new life in secret. Others believe they might have drowned. Every other escape has been unsuccessful though, with prisoners being shot by guards while attempting to escape or just being caught before even making it that far. One prisoner in 1962, John Paul Scott, actually did manage to make it ashore, but he suffered from hypothermia and police found him unconscious. The building now stands as a museum, said to be haunted by the spirits of its former inmates. Visitors and staff claim to have experienced strange phenomena like hearing whispers in empty cells to even seeing full-on apparitions. And coming at number 1, we have Ohio Penitentiary in Columbus, Ohio. Yay, Ohio, my new favorite state. This penitentiary began operation in 1834, and just like every other institution on this list, its history is dark. It was home to hundreds of executions through hanging and the electric chair, but this place is probably most famous for a deadly fire that broke out in 1930. The fire was set off from a candle that ignited oily rags on the roof of the West Block, and it spread very quickly. Prisoners were pleading with guards to let them out of their cells, and some guards did help, but others just left them to burn. A group of prisoners managed to overpower a guard and retrieve his keys, using them to free other inmates, and pretty soon a massive riot started. Firefighters arrived on scene and were pelted with rocks for some reason. Fights broke out, and eventually the military was called in and the prison was completely surrounded. In the end, 322 inmates died, 230 were sent to the hospital, making this one of the deadliest fires/prison riots in North American history.
Number 5, Camp Lenimir, Djibouti. Let me start off by saying that Djibouti is a small country. Now, the strategic location of the small nation is the reason the US established a military base on its soil. From the base called Camp Lenimir, the US launched drone strikes against targets in Somalia and Yemen. There are also unconfirmed claims that the CIA operates a secret prison at the base. The US Congress reportedly has information about the existence of the facility but has refused to declassify it. Mohammed Abdullah Sahil Assad was one of the inmates supposedly held in the prison. He said he was tormented there before he was transferred to another black site in Afghanistan, where he was also mistreated. Mahdi Hashi, another supposed former prisoner, said he was taken to the prison after he was kidnapped by the CIA agents in Somalia. He claimed he was arrested because he refused to spy for British intelligence. Number 4, gay prisons, Chechnya. Chechnya is a Muslim-majority autonomous region of Russia. They have their own head of state, Razmin Kadyrov, who Russia leaves to do as he wishes. Kadyrov has been accused of running secret prisons where gay men are mistreated so badly that they end up dying. Russia and Chechnya do not tolerate gay people, and while Russia has introduced laws to keep gay people in line, Chechnya prefers abducting them and keeping them in secret detention centers. Now, some journalists who reported the existence of the secret prison in Chechnya have been found dead under suspicious circumstance. Novaya Gazeta, the first paper to report the kidnappings, detentions, and deaths, has seen at least 6 of its journalists die. Now, some of its living journalists are still being threatened, and others have even fled the country. Number 3, black jails, China. The black jails are independent secret prisons illegally operated by various Chinese provinces and local government. Because of the governmental structure in China, citizens are expected to report any grievance to their local and provincial governments. Now, if they do not get justice, they are allowed to report to the central government at Beijing. Now, the central government itself uses the number of reports it receives to determine the effectiveness of the local and provincial government. Now, to avoid getting into Beijing's black books, the local and provincial governments employed over 10,000 people to hunt, kidnap, detain, and torture citizens who travel to Beijing to make reports. The prisons are usually unoccupied homes, psychiatric wards, and guest house. In 2009, it was suspected that the provinces operated 73 black jails inside Beijing. The central government initially denied the existence of black jails, but later confirmed that they were real. Number 2. Penny Lane, Guantanamo Bay. Penny Lane was another secret prison at Guantanamo Bay. Opened in 2003, the prisoners held there enjoyed a life of luxury. They lived in cottages complete with a very comfortable bed, kitchen, patio, shower, and television. And they could also request for additional luxuries. The fact that the inmates held in Penny Lane enjoyed a life of luxury shouldn't be very surprising, as the place was exclusively reserved for confirmed rad criminals undergoing training as double agents. After their training, they were released and allowed to return to their cells, where they sent inside information back to the CIA. Now, this information was used to prepare drone strikes against targets of interest. In exchange, the CIA gave the criminals millions of dollars in payment. The program was not a total success though, as some of the criminals rejoined their cells and never reported back to the CIA. Now, some also became unwillingly double agents after the CIA threatened to harm their families. Due to all of this, the double agent program ended in 2006. Papa II, India. In the 1990s, Indian military and local guerrillas clashed in the Kashmir region of the country, and the soldiers' methods of finding an enemy could get pretty brutal. The ID parade involved rounding up the boys and men of the area and showing them one by one to masked informers. Whoever the informer pointed at was taken away, where they were often taken to an interrogation center, where they were tormented or had their lives ended without much delay. Now, if they were really unlucky, they were taken to the Papa II prison camp, which was a place you'd rarely walk away from. Now, a 19-year-old Muslim student named Masraf Sultan is one of the lucky people to survive Papa II. Now, after he was picked out in an ID parade for reasons he did not know, he was beaten up, blindfolded, and taken away for interrogation. Now, despite his instance that he was innocent, Sultan was stripped naked, beat up so badly that several of his bones broke. After that, they took the poor, nude, broken young man and threw him in a cell of the infamous Papa II, which was on an old estate of a local ruler. Sultan's time in Papa II was short, but that didn't make it any less painful. The guards threw cold water at him, attached metal rings on his genitals and both his feet, and administered electric shock. Finally, he was taken away to a nearby flood channel where a group of soldiers shot him several times. Miraculously, he survived, but he was paralyzed for the rest of his life. Though the soldiers of the India's border security force used the facility to interrogate and end the lives of thousands of people, it was actually just one of 7 similar centers in the region.
Next, we have Bangu Prison in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. This prison is infamous for its overcrowding and violence. Bangu opened in the early 1900s and has long been at the center of crime and corruption in the Brazilian penal system. The facility was originally built to house 1,500 inmates, but at times it's held more than triple that number, which makes for horrendous living conditions. The overcrowding has resulted in unsanitary environments and limited access to basic necessities like food and medical care. And it doesn't help that gangs control different sections of the prison. And when I say control, I mean like they control it. Prison guards are paid off by them. Not surprising that fights and riots are common. In 2004, a series of riots led to the deaths of over 30 inmates. It's clear that authorities just struggle to maintain order here. There's just too much corruption, far too much organized crime. Gitarama Prison in Rwanda is now called Muhanga Prison. Apparently, it's not as bad as it was, but it was pretty bad. And it's hard to find any definitive information on this because the government kind of downplays how bad things really are or were here. This facility was notorious for extreme overcrowding. And I've said that a lot on this list, but in this case, my God, it really is next level overcrowded. It was built to hold about 400 inmates apparently, but often housed over 7,000, leading to some of the most horrendous living situations imaginable. When you look at footage of this place, it's just nightmarish. Inmates would be crammed into small spaces with little to no ventilation. Many were forced to sleep on the bare floor on top of each other. There's virtually no sanitation, leading to disease outbreaks as well. And the lack of proper food was so bad that some were actually forced to eat the remains of dead inmates. That is about as horrific as it gets. Not only are you facing the challenge of surviving all the violence that comes in a prison and all the overcrowding, but the illness as well. Malnutrition, lack of medical attention has led to a significant number of preventable deaths at the prison. At one point, it was estimated that half a dozen or so prisoners were dying on a daily basis. Bangkwang Central Prison in Thailand is often referred to as the Bangkok Hilton, which is a sarcastic nickname. This is not a place you want to be. The prison has a reputation for being one of the toughest in the country. It was established to hold high-profile and dangerous criminals, but also houses a significant number of foreign inmates, many of whom are serving time for illicit substance offenses. Bangkwang is notorious for its brutal conditions. Overcrowding is a bit of an issue here, and inmates often live in cramped quarters with limited personal space. It also houses Thailand's main death row and execution chamber. The prison is known for its harsh discipline methods. If you step out of line, you can expect some pretty severe consequences, which can include solitary confinement or even physical punishment. And for the first 3 months of your sentence, you're required to wear leg irons. Death row inmates used to have theirs permanently welded on, but that hasn't been the case since 2013. Now, let's dive into the unsettling world of black jails in China. These facilities are not officially recognized as prisons. They operate outside any legal framework. Black jails are used primarily to detain petitioners seeking justice for grievances that have been ignored at the local level. Now, instead of being dealt with through formal legal channels though, these people find themselves abducted by security forces and held in these secretive makeshift facilities, black jails. The concept of black jails came about after the Chinese government abolished a previous detention system in 2003. Since then, these extra-legal centers have become a solution for authorities overwhelmed by the sheer number of people attempting to petition for their rights. Located in various types of buildings, from state-owned hotels to government offices, black jails can be found in major cities, particularly in Beijing. Human rights groups estimate there are between 7 and 50 of these facilities in operation, but it's hard to tell the exact number because of obvious reasons. Inside these jails, conditions are said to be absolutely horrifying. I mean, you can only imagine what goes on in a secret facility operating outside the law. There have been disturbing incidents involving SA in these facilities. In one case, a guard was sentenced to 8 years for his attack on a female petitioner. At least he did go to jail, though. The authorities employ interceptors, or black guards, to capture and transport petitioners back to their hometowns, stripping them of their possessions in the process. Despite numerous reports from human rights organizations, though, the Chinese government has consistently denied the existence of black jails. And finally, we have Black Dolphin Prison in Russia, often cited as one of the most brutal correctional facilities in the world. It houses some of the country's most dangerous criminals, including killers and serial offenders. The reputation of Black Dolphin is built on its extreme security measures and harsh treatment of its inmates. One of the first things you'll notice about Black Dolphin, if you're ever unlucky enough to go there, is its high-tech security. The prison is surrounded by thick walls and barbed wire, and it's equipped with watchtowers manned by guards with firearms. Inside, life for the inmates is grim. They're confined to tiny cells where they spend up to 23 hours a day. Each cell typically houses 2 inmates, but they're kept under strict rules that prevent them from interacting with one another. The isolation is meant to keep tensions low and minimize conflicts, but it can drive people to the brink of a madness. Daily routines are rigidly controlled, and the psychological strain must be incredibly intense. Inmates are required to maintain a low profile, following commands without question. Any sign of defiance can result in punishment, including solitary confinement or physical violence. Inmates can also be subjected to a practice called the crawl, where they move on their hands and knees while being monitored. The crawl is done to dehumanize the prisoners, to remind them of the power dynamic within the prison. Out of this list, which one of these prisons would you go to if you were forced to? Let me know in the comments. And with that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.